"You called my work obsolete," Josiah Holt said. Snow-covered Stonecross Road and the overturned royal carriage beside it. Duke Richard Alderwick stood in the storm with blood drying along his collar. One hand gripped the shattered carriage door while the other pressed against his ribs. Behind Josiah, the representative of the crown, lay beneath blankets inside a rescue wagon built in the workshop Richard had ordered closed. The broken royal convoy stretched down the hill. One carriage had overturned. Two had struck the embankment. Another stood without its front wheel, its axle split through the center. Richard looked towards the damaged vehicles. "I need every carriage repaired before morning." Josiah examined the twisted iron and broken spokes. "You closed my workshop. I will pay whatever you demand." Josiah met his gaze. "You believe money is respect delivered late." Richard's face tightened. "What do you require?" Anna Holt stepped forward, carrying a folded document. She placed it upon the shattered door of the Duke's carriage. "Not a price, Your Grace." Then she held out a pen. Terms. 18 months earlier, Richard Alderwick had announced that the old transport system was finished. The great coach yard stood behind him as reporters, merchants, and government officials gathered beneath a temporary pavilion. Rows of newly painted carriages filled the yard. Every wheel matched. Every axle had been cast to the same measurement. Every metal fitting could be replaced from a standard supply catalogue. Dr. Nathan Bell, the London engineer who designed the system, stood beside the Duke. "These vehicles represent the future of regional transport," Richard said. "Alderwick will no longer depend upon slow workshops producing a different answer to the same problem." The audience applauded. Duchess Marianne Alderwick stood near the front. She had supported the project from the beginning. The old carriage network was expensive and unreliable. Parts differed from village to village. A broken axle could delay a mail coach for days, while a wheelwright shaped a replacement by hand. Richard's plan promised faster repairs, lower prices, and hundreds of new jobs. There was only one serious objection. Josiah Holt refused to sign the safety certificate. Josiah had worked in the Alderwick wheelwright's yard for nearly 40 years. He had built wheels for farm carts, mail coaches, grain wagons, and military transports. He did not oppose machines. His workshop used a modern lathe. He had introduced metal gauges years before other craftsmen in the county. He supported replaceable fittings and standard measurements. What he opposed was approving vehicles he believed unsuitable for northern roads. Josiah stood before the Transport Council with one of the new wheels beside him. "The ash in these spokes has not seasoned long enough," he said. Nathan Bell examined the wood. "It meets the supplier's moisture standard for summer storage in London. The measurement is universal. The weather is not." A few council members smiled. Richard did not. Josiah continued. "The cast-iron axles may survive level roads in warm conditions. In hard frost, small weaknesses become cracks." Nathan replied, "The axles have passed laboratory stress tests." "How many passed after a winter on Stonecross Hill?" "The design has not yet operated there." "Then it has not been tested where His Grace intends to use it." Richard leaned forward. "What precisely do you recommend?" "A trial fleet." "For how long?" "1 year. 4 seasons." Richard looked around the room. The Royal Mail Committee expected a decision within 2 months. Investors wanted orders. A year-long delay could cost Alderwick the contract. Josiah pointed towards the wheel. "Keep the old vehicles for the northern routes. Use these on the low roads. Widen the rims. Replace cast iron with forged steel where the load is greatest. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. That would be prudent. Richard turned sharply. You support him? I designed 12 vehicles for extended trials, Your Grace. You assured me the system was suitable for expansion. After regional testing, Richard heard only another delay. The newspapers had already described Alderwick as the likely centre of northern transport reform. Richard wanted the royal carriage contract, the military supply routes, and the mail service. He also wanted to prove that an old aristocratic estate could modernize without waiting for London to lead it. His father had resisted every innovation. He had called rail experiments vulgar, refused improved road drainage, and preserved failing businesses because they were traditional. Richard had spent his adult life rejecting that legacy. Every warning now sounded to him like his father's voice. Every cautious craftsman looked like another obstacle defending the past. Marianne recognized the danger. That evening, she found Richard in his study, reviewing construction schedules. Josiah did not tell you to abandon the project. He asked me to delay it until the opportunity disappears. He asked for a trial. We have completed trials. In summer, the engineer approved the design. He approved 12 vehicles. You ordered 120. Richard looked up. You have been speaking to Holt. I speak to the people expected to use the carriages. He is protecting his workshop. He is protecting the passengers. Richard closed the report. You defend him because poverty makes stubbornness look noble. Marianne's expression changed. I defend him because your title does not make damaged iron unbreakable. The dispute became public during the first official demonstration. Richard invited investors, transport officials, and the press to watch the new vehicles complete a timed course. The route crossed smooth roads near the estate. The weather was clear. The carriages performed perfectly. They moved faster than the old fleet. A damaged wheel was replaced in minutes, using standard parts. The crowd applauded. Richard called Josiah forward. Will you now certify the system? Josiah looked at the road. No. The reporters leaned closer. Richard's smile disappeared. On what grounds? This is not Stonecross. There is no frozen descent, no heavy grain load, and no winter mud. The vehicles have passed every test placed before them, not the test that will break them. Richard heard laughter among the younger investors. He saw men waiting to learn whether a village craftsman could embarrass a duke without consequence. A man who shapes wheels in a village shed does not decide the future of national transport, Richard said. Silence followed. Josiah did not lower his eyes. No, Your Grace, but he may know which wheel will survive the road. Richard ordered his workshop closed before the demonstration ended. The Holt family had 6 weeks to leave their home. The house, yard, and timber stores belonged legally to the estate. Richard reclaimed all of them. He cancelled Josiah's contracts. He dismissed the apprentices who refused to sign the certificates in his place. He informed local carriers that anyone employing Josiah would lose access to Alderwick routes. Anna Holt watched estate officials mark the seasoned timber for sale. Some of that wood had been stored for 7 years. You cannot replace this by ordering green timber from London, she told the yard manager. I follow the Duke's instructions. So did everyone who signed the unsafe wheels. The man looked away. Marianne paid for wagons to move the Holt family's tools. Richard confronted her when he discovered the expense. You have publicly undermined my order. You removed their livelihood. They refused lawful employment. They refused to certify unsafe work. They questioned the entire Transport Council. They questioned a wheel. Richard stepped closer. You have turned this into a moral drama. No. You turned disagreement into homelessness. Anna rented an abandoned warehouse beyond the Alderwick boundary. The roof leaked. The doors did not close properly, but the building had enough room for a forge and a timber rack. Former apprentices joined them. Independent carriers brought damaged wagons because Alderwick's new service stations refused older designs. Josiah and Anna began building hybrid vehicles. They used standard fittings where they were useful. They widened wheels for northern mud. They selected seasoned local wood. They fitted forged steel axles to heavy carriages. They changed the suspension after speaking directly with drivers. Richard dismissed the new workshop as a refuge for men afraid of progress. For several months, it appeared he was right. The new Alderwick fleet transformed summer transport. Mail arrived earlier. Repair costs fell. Standard parts allowed inexperienced mechanics to replace damaged fittings. The newspapers praised Richard. The Royal Transport Committee invited him to demonstrate the system during a winter journey. If successful, Alderwick would receive contracts worth more than any previous commercial agreement in the estate's history. Richard accepted immediately. Marianne read the proposed route. Stonecross Hill? It is the most difficult road in the district. That is why Josiah warned you about it. That is why success there will end this argument. Safety is not an argument you win by choosing the most dangerous stage. Richard pushed the route map towards her. The weather is forecast to remain clear. Forecasts change. Every decision contains risk. Yes, that does not make every risk necessary. He looked at her with growing frustration. You have never forgiven me for dismissing Holt. I have not forgiven you for believing rank made humiliation acceptable. The first failures appeared in November. A mail coach lost a wheel on a shallow bend. The axle had cracked near the hub. The official report blamed excessive speed. A grain wagon overturned when 3 spokes broke at once. The driver blamed poor timber. A third carriage developed a loose iron rim after a freezing night. The transport office described it as improper maintenance. Marianne collected the reports. She noticed the same batch numbers appearing repeatedly. Richard dismissed the pattern. Any fleet of this size will experience failures. The old fleet did not lose 3 wheels in 6 weeks. The old fleet moved half as quickly and cost twice as much. Those figures do not explain identical cracks. Richard ordered the damaged vehicles removed before the Royal Committee arrived. He did not order the remaining axles independently inspected. Josiah saw one of the damaged mail coaches outside an inn. He asked permission to examine it. The driver recognized him and agreed. A thin line ran along the underside of the axle. It was almost invisible. Josiah struck the metal lightly with a small hammer. The sound was wrong. He cut into the damaged section and found a hollow imperfection left from casting. Cold had widened it. He inspected 2 more vehicles from the same production batch. Both had similar faults. Josiah sent a written warning to Richard. The cast axles are developing internal fractures under frost. Do not use the Royal Convoy on Stonecross Road until every axle is tested. Richard read the first paragraph. He wrote across the envelope, Mr. Holt no longer holds authority at Alderwick. Then he returned it. Marianne kept the copy Josiah had sent to her. Read the complete report, she urged. I have already heard his objections. This is new evidence. It is another attempt to regain influence. You dismissed him. He has no influence to regain. He wants the public satisfaction of proving me wrong. And you would risk lives to deny him that satisfaction? Richard's expression hardened. The journey proceeds. The royal convoy departed beneath a pale winter sky. The leading carriage carried the Crown's representative and 2 senior officials. Richard travelled in the second vehicle. Marianne sat opposite him. Investors, journalists, and transport inspectors followed in 6 identical carriages. Each vehicle had been polished. Each axle had been checked visually by Alderwick mechanics. None had been opened for internal testing. The first half of the journey passed without difficulty. The roads were firm. The convoy maintained excellent speed. Reporters wrote notes praising the quiet suspension and efficient formation. Richard glanced towards Marianne. The road appears less frightened than you expected. She looked through the window at the falling temperature. We have not reached Stonecross. Snow began near the top of the hill. The road descended sharply towards a narrow bridge. The leading driver reduced speed. As the first carriage entered the slope, a crack sounded beneath it. The front axle broke. The wheel separated from the carriage and rolled across the road. The vehicle dropped violently, turned sideways and struck the embankment. Richard's driver pulled the brake. The second carriage skidded. Its narrow wheels failed to grip the frozen road. It struck the first vehicle and tipped into the ditch. The remaining carriages collided behind them. Horses screamed. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. Richard struck the carriage wall and lost consciousness for several seconds. When he opened his eyes, Marianne was pressing a cloth against his forehead. "Can you stand?" He tried. Pain moved through his ribs. Outside, officials shouted for help. The Crown's representative was trapped beneath a damaged roof panel. One horse had broken a leg. Several passengers were bleeding. Snow thickened across the road. Richard ordered a rider sent to the nearest Alderwick rescue station. The man returned an hour later on foot. The rescue carriage broke an axle 2 miles from here. Send another. It was sent from the northern post. And the same failure. Every official vehicle capable of carrying the injured used the same components. Richard looked along the blocked road. For the first time, standardization no longer appeared efficient. It looked like a single weakness repeated across an entire system. Night approached. The temperature fell. Marianne organized blankets and moved the least injured passengers into the carriages still standing. Richard heard horses in the distance. Lanterns appeared through the snow. 3 wide-wheeled wagons approached from the northern road. Josiah sat beside the first driver. Anna rode in the second. Behind them came the apprentices Richard had dismissed. Their vehicles moved slowly but steadily through the snow. The wheels were broad. The axles were forged steel. The suspension flexed over the frozen ruts. They had been built in the workshop Richard called Obsolete. Josiah examined the Crown representative first. He and Anna cut away the damaged carriage frame and moved the injured man into their rescue wagon. The apprentices freed the trapped drivers. They calmed the horses, splinted injuries, and used portable braziers to warm the passengers. Richard approached Josiah. Blood marked his collar. "I need every carriage repaired before morning." Josiah looked towards the broken convoy. 3 axles were split. 2 wheel rims had loosened. Several spokes had failed. "You close my workshop. I will pay whatever you demand. You believe money is respect, delivered late." Richard's face tightened. "This is not the time. It was the time when I warned you. People may die. That is why we came." Josiah pointed towards the rescue wagons. "We will carry the injured to safety. We will not certify these vehicles or return them to the road. I am the Duke of Alderwick, and the wheel is still broken. Anna placed a folded document upon the shattered carriage door. It was an artisan's safety charter. Richard read the first lines. No worker could be dismissed for refusing to certify unsafe equipment. No transport system could replace its reserve fleet before completing 4 season trials. Drivers, mechanics, and craftsmen would hold voting seats on the Safety Council. All accident reports would be public. Richard looked up. "What is this?" "Terms," Anna said. "You are bargaining while people are injured." "No," Josiah replied. "We rescued them before asking for anything." He placed the pen beside the charter. "You dismissed my judgment when it cost you pride. You cannot summon it only when it costs you blood." Snow gathered upon Richard's shoulders. Behind him lay the ruined convoy that was supposed to prove his vision. Before him stood the people he had stripped of work, home, and standing because they had refused to lie for him. For the first time, Richard had no authority capable of making the broken wheels turn. Anna pushed the pen towards him. "You will listen before we build another one." Richard stared at the charter while snow gathered along its folded edges. The Crown's representative groaned inside the rescue wagon. Around them, the apprentices continued working. They splinted a driver's arm, freed a trapped horse, and carried the injured away from the wreckage. No one waited for the Duke's decision before saving lives. Richard looked at Josiah. "You would leave the convoy here. I would leave unsafe carriages off the road. The royal party cannot remain stranded." "They will not. Our wagons can carry them to the nearest inn." "And the vehicles?" "They remain until daylight." Richard glanced down the hill. The broken carriages had been intended to secure Alderwick's future. Now they lay scattered beneath snow like evidence presented before a court. Anna held out the pen. "This charter does not require you to surrender the estate. It gives laborers power over ducal policy. It gives them power to refuse work that may kill someone." Richard's pride offered one final defense. "You are exploiting an emergency." Josiah's expression remained calm. "No, Your Grace. The emergency began when you dismissed every person willing to prevent it." Marianne stood beside Richard. She did not ask him to sign. She knew that if she pressed him now, he might later claim the decision belonged to her influence rather than his responsibility. Richard looked towards the rescue wagon. The Crown's representative had trusted Alderwick's system because Richard had publicly declared it safe. The drivers had trusted it because refusing meant losing employment. The apprentices had been dismissed because they would not certify it. Only one person had possessed the power to force the convoy onto Stonecross Road. Richard took the pen. He signed. Josiah did not celebrate. He read the signature, folded the charter, and gave it to Anna for safekeeping. Then he returned to the injured. The royal party was moved in stages to a coaching inn 3 miles north. Josiah's broad-wheeled wagons crossed the frozen road without losing traction. Their suspension absorbed the ruts that had thrown Alderwick's lighter carriages sideways. Richard travelled in the final wagon with Marianne. Neither spoke for most of the journey. At the inn, Dr. Nathan Bell arrived with officials from the Transport Committee. He examined the broken axles after dawn. Each contained similar casting flaws. Cold had widened the hollow sections until the metal failed under load. Nathan placed a fractured piece on the table before Richard. These vehicles should never have operated as a complete winter fleet. Richard looked at him. "You designed them. I designed a trial fleet. You said the system could be expanded after regional testing." Richard remembered the original report. There had been paragraphs about winter trials, local timber, reserve vehicles, and route-specific modifications. He had read the recommendations as hesitation. Then he had removed them from the program summary presented to investors. You knew the axles might fail. I knew they had not been proven in these conditions. That is not the same thing. No, Nathan said. It is why one tests them. Richard looked towards Josiah. You were both uncertain. Josiah shook his head. I was certain enough not to sign. The Royal Transport Committee opened an inquiry immediately. The hearings were held in Alderwick's Great Hall because several injured officials could not yet travel. Drivers, mechanics, engineers, and former apprentices testified. The evidence showed that warnings had arrived for months. A mail coach driver had reported a crack and lost his winter bonus. A mechanic who requested internal testing had been transferred. 2 station masters had complained that narrow wheels performed badly in mud. Their reports were marked as operational resistance. Marianne presented the accident records she had collected. Every document carried a date earlier than the royal journey. Richard listened while his own instructions were read aloud. Proceed without delay. No further external review is required. Mr. Holt holds no authority at Alderwick. The chairman of the inquiry asked Nathan, Did His Grace receive your full recommendation? Yes. Did you advise replacing the entire fleet before winter testing? No. Did the manufacturer conceal the material used? No. Were the laboratory results false? No. They were incomplete for northern conditions. The chairman turned towards Richard. Were you deceived? Richard could have blamed ambition, schedules, or political pressure. He could have said the danger had not been certain. Instead, he answered, No. The room became quiet. I was advised to conduct a trial. I ordered a complete replacement. I was warned by Mr. Holt and dismissed him. Why? Richard looked towards Josiah. Because he contradicted me publicly. The royal contract was withdrawn. Alderwick lost the mail expansion, the military transport agreement, and several commercial investors. The damaged convoy required compensation beyond the estate's insurance coverage because the inquiry found negligent disregard of safety warnings. Richard resigned from the Northern Transport Committee. He sold the hunting lodge at Bracken Hill, 3 London carriages, and a portion of his private art collection. The money paid for medical care for the injured, compensation for drivers and their families, the rebuilding of repair stations, the purchase of forged steel axles, the restoration of a reserve fleet, wages lost by dismissed craftsmen, repairs to roads damaged during emergency recovery. The Holt workshop was returned to Josiah and Anna. The timber sold from it could not be recovered. Richard paid for replacement stock, although Josiah reminded him that properly seasoned wood required years, not money alone. The apprentices were offered reinstatement. Most accepted only after the new Safety Council was legally established. Richard's public apology took place in the coachyard where he had once humiliated Josiah. This time, the platforms were occupied by drivers, wheelwrights, stable workers, and mechanics. Richard stood on the ground. I believed education gave one man knowledge and labor gave another only obedience. Josiah watched without expression. I treated experience as resistance because it arrived from someone I had the power to dismiss. Richard looked towards the damaged axle displayed beside the old ceremonial carriage. The wheel broke where my arrogance had made the system weak. He restored Josiah's professional standing. He apologized to the apprentices whose livelihoods he had taken. Then he faced the drivers. You were expected to trust vehicles that I had not allowed you to question. That will not happen again." No one applauded immediately. Richard had finally learned that an apology was not another performance requiring approval. Marianne remained at Alderwick, but their marriage did not return to its former ease. She moved the Transport Relief Office out of the main house and into a building beside the coachyard. Richard found her there one evening, reviewing claims from injured drivers. "You could use the West Office," he said. "The drivers should not have to enter the palace to report a dangerous carriage." "You believe they fear me?" "They feared losing work. I have changed the rules." "Yes. Do you not trust them?" "I trust rules more when they have survived the person who wrote them." Richard accepted the correction. After a moment he said, "You warned me. So did Josiah. I dismissed you because I believed you were making his cause your own. I made safety my cause. I thought you wanted to prove that compassion was wiser than policy." Marianne closed the ledger. "You valued my compassion while it made your ambition appear humane. You despised it when it required you to stop." Richard did not defend himself. "What happens to us? We remain married." "That is not what I asked." "I know." She returned to the claims. He left without demanding an answer she was not ready to give. The new Transport Council began meeting the following month. Its membership included engineers, drivers, wheelwrights, stable workers, route inspectors, estate officials, a representative from the relief office. Richard chaired the first meeting. By the third, he no longer assumed he should. When a driver objected to using a new brake design on a mountain road, Richard felt the old irritation rise. The objection delayed a commercial delivery. Investors were waiting. He looked around the table. Once, he would have asked whether the driver possessed formal qualifications. Instead, he asked, "What did you observe?" The man described overheating near the rear assembly. Josiah inspected the mechanism. The defect was confirmed. The delivery was postponed. No one was dismissed. Nathan Bell remained involved in the redesign. He and Josiah disagreed frequently. Nathan favored standard components. Josiah insisted upon regional adaptation. Anna understood both systems and forced them to document every assumption. The result was not a return to old craftsmanship, nor was it blind standardization. The new fleet used replaceable fittings, forged steel axles, seasoned local ash, wider wheels for northern roads, reinforced suspension for heavy loads, different specifications for lowland and mountain routes, 4-season testing before full deployment. Richard attended the trials. He did not issue certificates. He waited for the people who built, drove, and repaired the vehicles to sign freely. Josiah's charter also changed employment throughout Alderwick. No worker could be punished for refusing unsafe instructions without an independent review. Accident reports were public. Drivers could stop a vehicle without losing wages. Reserve carriages remained available, even when keeping them appeared inefficient. Investors complained that the system cost more than Richard's original model. He answered, "The cheapest carriage is not the one with the lowest purchase price. It is the one that reaches its destination without injuring the people inside it." The sentence appeared in newspapers. This time, Richard did not enjoy the praise. He knew the thought had been purchased through blood, lost work, and public failure. A year after the accident, Richard visited Josiah's workshop alone. The old wheelwright was fitting an iron rim around a new wheel. Heat shimmered above the forge. Richard waited until Josiah finished. "I have come to ask whether you will serve permanently on the council." I already serve for 1-year terms. I meant as chief advisor. Josiah shook his head. You still believe respect requires promotion? I thought the title would recognize your knowledge. My knowledge was real before you recognized it. Richard absorbed the answer. What would you prefer? That no apprentice standing where I stood must lose his home for telling a duke that iron is cracked. The charter protects that. Then maintain the charter. Richard nodded. I will. Josiah studied him. You may be learning. It was the nearest thing to praise Richard received from him. Marianne watched the change, without rewarding every step. She did not return to quietly correcting policies after meetings. She placed objections on the official record. When Richard brought incomplete reports, she sent them back. When he requested her opinion, she asked whether he wanted agreement or examination. Examination, he learned to say. Sometimes her answer delayed him. Sometimes it proved him wrong. He stopped treating either outcome as betrayal. Their conversations gradually lost the careful formality that had followed Stonecross, not because Marianne forgot, because Richard no longer required her to hide the cost of remembering. 3 years after the accident, Alderwick presented its rebuilt transport fleet. The ceremony took place in winter. Snow lay beside the road, but the sky was clear. The convoy would cross Stonecross Hill, the same route where the royal carriage had overturned. Before departure, Richard stood before the Safety Council. Has every driver, engineer, and wheelwright signed freely? Anna examined the certificates. The mechanics have. Nathan nodded. The engineering review is complete. A driver raised one concern about the weight of the final supply wagon. The load was reduced before anyone proceeded. Josiah struck each leading axle with a small hammer and listened. At last, he stepped back. The convoy is fit for the road. Only then did Richard enter his carriage. He did not occupy the first vehicle. That place belonged to the testing team. Josiah sat beside the lead driver. Anna traveled with the route inspectors. The convoy descended Stonecross Hill without incident. The broad wheels held the frozen road. The suspension remained stable. Every axle reached the bridge intact. After the journey, Richard and Marianne walked through the restored coachyard. Apprentices worked beside modern machinery. Old tools hung near precision gauges. Seasoned timber stood beside crates of standard parts. Nothing in the workshop belonged entirely to the past or the future. I once believed respect should follow rank, Richard said. Marianne looked towards an apprentice, examining a wheel. Respect follows the person willing to hear no before someone is hurt. Richard nodded. I thought leadership meant deciding quickly. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it means allowing the person nearest the wheel to tell you it will not turn. They stopped beside the workshop doors. Richard did not ask whether she had forgiven him completely. He had learned that forgiveness was not a certificate issued after successful testing. It required time, evidence, and the freedom to refuse. He offered his hand. Marianne looked at it, then placed hers within his. Alderwick had not been saved because Richard rejected innovation. It was saved because he finally understood that progress and experience were not enemies. The carriage had failed because one weakness had been repeated through an entire system, and everyone who recognized it had been silenced. The rebuilt fleet succeeded because authority no longer belonged only to the man who owned the road. It was shared with those who knew where the wheel would break.